Hello, Debate Kansas City. Isaac Allen here with you. Going to talk to you about being a presiding officer and keeping precedence today. Keeping precedence is by far and away probably one of the most confusing things to get under your belt as a young presiding officer. But once you figure out how the system works, it's really easy and you're able to move forward. Now, the first thing to remember whenever you're going to be a presiding officer in any round is always to keep the rules with you. What do I mean by that? I mean keep your sheet of the most used parliamentary procedure motions and a copy of the most recent National Forensic League Student Congress Manual. So that way, in case you're questioned on any subject, you have the documentation to go back and double check yourself and the parliamentarian on. Now, the second thing, which I talked about earlier, was keeping a precedence chart. Very, very intimidating at first, I would say. Very intimidating at first. Now, you see here an example of a precedence chart. Okay? Now, there is a thing called precedence, and that is how many speeches has a person given in a session of Student Congress. And then there's recency. What order were those speeches given? Now, if you notice on my precedence chart, I have names, just like a seating chart would be, and numbers. Each one of those numbers represents a speech and what order it was speech. So you see there at the top corner, Jim Tobin gave the first and fourth speech. Isaac Allen gave the 8th and 10th speech. James Watts gave the second speech. Gabe Cook gave the 9th speech. If you were looking at this, who would be up to give a speech next? Gabe Cook or LeBron James? Notice, Gabe Cook gave the 9th speech and LeBron James gave the 7th speech. Whose turn would it be? Well, strictly speaking, according to precedence, it would be whoever the presiding officer decided. They would have equal precedent because they both spoke once. Now, some presiding officers choose to use recency. Now, with recency, when we look at that, we notice that Gabe gave the 9th speech and LeBron gave the 7th speech. So LeBron has spoke least recently, so you would give it to LeBron James as opposed to Gabe Cook. This is simply how you keep track of precedent and recency. Precedent is the number of speeches, so just the fact you could just put an X down there and everybody could have 2 speeches, could both have 2 X's, and so forth. I take the additional step of adding recency because I believe it's an additional way to break ties and be more fair as a presiding officer. You continue this through the entire session. At Debate Kansas City weeknight tournaments, precedence does carry over from session to session. If during the city championship debate, it carries over session to session, but starts anew in super session. So make sure you're very clear on the tournament rules when precedent resets. That's something that's a perfect question for parliamentarians or tournament directors, something you can ask your coach before you go to the debate tournament in the first place. So, after you're keeping precedent and you're doing recency, another problem that presiding officers often run into is who do I call on to ask questions? I try to do it geographically. I try to start in the front, move to the back, move to the right, move to the left. The front, the back, the right, the left, the right, the back, the front. Make sure that you're getting each geographic region of the floor plenty of questions. Another common question here is, what do I do with one person that is always standing up to ask questions? You know, that one person who's just always like, ooh, ooh, ooh. To me, I'm saying that person wants the nomination. But second of all, when in conflict, you should certainly give that person their due in asking questions. But if other people who haven't asked questions are standing up, allow those people to ask their questions, and then you can move to the person who is the persistent and consistent question asker. Lastly, it's important to note that anytime you are the presiding officer in a round of Student Congress, fairness is the name of the game. It is your job, and you will be scored on how fair you were to the individuals in that round. Your goal is to make sure that fair debate, happens on any given bill, and make sure that no one in the chamber is being discriminated against. You are, in essence, colorblind. So those are your goals. That was a little bit on how to keep precedence, a little bit of how to ask questions, and just some helpful tips on how to be a better presiding officer. As always, if you have any questions or want to know anything more about presiding, you can get a hold of me at Debate Kansas City. or allenic@umkc.edu. Feel free to email me on any of these questions. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you at the tournament.